World War I, also known as the Great War, left a mark on history unlike any other conflict before it. At its heart lay the Western Front, a line of trenches that stretched over 400 miles from the English Channel to the Swiss Alps. These trenches became infamous as the defining feature of the war, symbolizing not just a method of combat, but also the unrelenting misery endured by those who fought. In this video, we'll take a deep dive into the harsh realities of life in the trenches, examining everything from the grueling physical toll and rampant diseases to the psychological burdens and rare moments of humanity that kept hope alive. Imagine stepping into a trench for the first time. You're a young soldier, barely out of training, carrying a pack that feels heavier with every step. As you approach, you're struck first by the stench, a revolting combination of rotting flesh, sewage, and the sour odor of unwashed bodies. Then, as your eyes adjust to the dim light, you see what surrounds you. A narrow, muddy passage that stretches into the distance, with walls of wet earth reinforced by sagging wooden planks and sandbags. These trenches, initially intended as temporary shelters, became semi-permanent fixtures as the war dragged on. They were typically about 6 to 8 feet deep and 4 to 6 feet wide, just large enough for soldiers to crouch or stand without exposing themselves to enemy fire. Designed in a zigzag pattern to minimize the impact of shell fire and prevent a single blast from traveling down the entire length, the trenches were divided into 3 main types: frontline trenches, support trenches, and reserve trenches. Living conditions in the trenches were abysmal. One of the greatest physical challenges was the ever-present mud. Rain turned the earth into thick, sticky sludge that sucked at soldiers' boots and made even the simplest tasks exhausting. In some places, the mud was so deep that men and even horses drowned in it. The lack of proper drainage meant that water often pooled on the trench floors, leading to a condition called trench foot. Trench foot, caused by prolonged exposure to cold, wet, and unsanitary conditions, was both debilitating and agonizing. Soldiers' feet would swell and blister, the skin peeling away in layers. In severe cases, the condition led to gangrene, which could necessitate amputation. Preventative measures, such as changing socks regularly and rubbing feet with whale oil, were introduced, but they were often ineffective due to the scarcity of dry socks and the relentless wet conditions. Hygiene was almost non-existent. Soldiers went weeks or even months without bathing, and fresh uniforms were a luxury. This lack of cleanliness created a perfect environment for lice infestations. These tiny parasites burrowed into the seams of clothing and fed on the soldiers' blood, causing relentless itching and discomfort. Delousing efforts were constant, but often futile, as lice eggs hidden in clothing or bedding would hatch and reinfest the men within days. The trenches were also overrun with rats. These were no ordinary rats. They were massive, some reportedly the size of cats, and grew fat on a diet of discarded food and human remains. Soldiers would sometimes wake to find rats crawling over them or gnawing on their food supplies. The presence of rats was more than just a nuisance. It was a psychological torment, a grim reminder of the decay and death that surrounded them. While the physical conditions were grueling, the psychological toll of trench life was equally devastating. Soldiers lived in a constant state of alert, knowing that death could strike at any moment. Artillery bombardments were a daily occurrence, shaking the ground and filling the air with deafening noise. The fear of a shell landing in your section of the trench was always present, and the random nature of these strikes created a pervasive sense of helplessness. The threat of gas attacks added another layer of fear. Poison gases like chlorine and mustard gas were first used during World War I, introducing a new and horrifying form of warfare. Gas masks became standard equipment, but they were cumbersome and not always effective. The sight of men choking and dying from gas exposure haunted survivors long after the war ended. Many soldiers developed what was then known as shell shock, a condition we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Symptoms included uncontrollable shaking, nightmares, paralysis, and severe anxiety. The condition was poorly understood at the time, and many sufferers were accused of cowardice or malingering. Some were even court-martialed or executed. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new daily videos. The constant exposure to death and destruction took a heavy emotional toll. Soldiers often witnessed the deaths of close friends and comrades, sometimes unable to help or even retrieve their bodies from no man's land. Over time, many became numb to the violence, a psychological defense mechanism against the horrors they faced daily. Despite the relentless hardships, soldiers found ways to cope. Humor, however dark, was a vital survival tool. Soldiers shared jokes, sang songs, and gave nicknames to the conditions they endured, like calling lice chat or referring to the front line as the Big Show. Letters and care packages from home were lifelines, offering a connection to the outside world. Soldiers treasured photographs, letters, and small gifts sent by their families, which provided brief escapes from the grim reality of their surroundings. In their downtime, soldiers found creative ways to distract themselves. They played cards, wrote poetry, or crafted small items from spent shell casings. Football matches and impromptu concerts were organized whenever circumstances allowed, providing moments of camaraderie and normalcy. One of the most poignant displays of humanity occurred during the Christmas Truce of 1914. In several sections of the Western Front, soldiers from opposing sides laid down their weapons, exchanged greetings, and even played football in no man's land. These brief moments of peace and goodwill underscored the shared humanity of the men on both sides, even amid the brutality of war. Food in the trenches was a constant source of frustration and discomfort. Rations were often monotonous and unappetizing, consisting mainly of canned meat, hardtack biscuits, and pea soup. When supplies were low, soldiers resorted to eating whatever they could scavenge. Fresh food was rare, and contaminated water often led to outbreaks of diseases like dysentery. Tea was a staple, providing warmth and comfort in the cold, wet conditions. However, the tea was often brewed using water boiled in petrol cans, which gave it a distinctive and unpleasant taste. No man's land, the area between opposing trenches, was a nightmarish expanse of barbed wire, craters, and corpses. Soldiers who ventured into this desolate space faced almost certain death. Machine guns, sniper fire, and artillery made movement nearly impossible, and many wounded men were left stranded, their cries for help unanswered. Despite these dangers, soldiers were regularly ordered to go over the top, climbing out of their trenches to attack the enemy. These charges were often futile, resulting in massive casualties for minimal territorial gains. The bravery and sacrifice displayed during these assaults are a testament to the soldiers' resilience, but the sheer loss of life underscores the senselessness of trench warfare. The trenches of World War I were more than just a battlefield. They were a microcosm of the war itself, encapsulating its horrors and its moments of humanity. For those who lived through it, the experience left lifelong scars, both physical and emotional. The legacy of trench warfare serves as a stark reminder of the cost of conflict. It challenges us to honor the sacrifices of those who endured it and to strive for a world where such suffering is never repeated. As we reflect on the daily struggles of life in the trenches, we're reminded of the resilience and strength of the human spirit. These men faced unimaginable hardships, yet found ways to endure, to find moments of connection, and to cling to hope in the face of despair. If you found this deep dive into life in the trenches insightful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more explorations of history and humanity. Let's learn from the past and carry its lessons into the future. As always, stay curious.